So Texas gets to play right in the state of Texas against Ryan Day and the Death Star Supernova Ohio State Buckeyes. This team is playing the best football in the country. Steve Sarkisian is absolutely right. Ohio State's favored by 5.5 in a game that's going to be played right in the heart of Texas, which that should show everything because let's be honest, I feel like the line should be more. I think the idea that this is played in Dallas is keeping the line artificially low. I really do. Because I don't look at lines right away. I always think of just like final scores. I look at the game and then I look at the line, and that kind of informs who I pick against the spread. And in this game, I can just tell you, like, I'm going to pick Ohio State, and I am absolutely going to take them to cover. Look at what they have done over the last couple of weeks. Let's get into this game. This is a matchup that I predicted would be the title game. So here they are late in the season. They were on the same side of the bracket, so we're getting it in the semifinals. I believe this game will be almost won and lost in the first quarter. In that, I believe Ohio State has the ability and mindset right now to go turn this into exactly what happened to Tennessee and Oregon. So the number one job Texas has in this game, number one, amongst other jobs, but number one, you got to survive the first quarter. You have to survive what is inevitably going to be an offensive onslaught early of aggressive play calling from the best offense in the country. They've got to survive. Texas has built big leads over the last two games in the playoffs. Ohio State has as well. Texas, after the big leads, didn't play quite as well. Ohio State kind of cruised to victory in both of those games. Texas has to survive the first quarter. Ohio State jumped out 21-0 on Tennessee, then 34-0 on Oregon. Those are the leads in the first two playoff games. If that's the case, it's a wrap. Both of those games were a wrap. Tennessee was not coming back from a 21-point deficit. Oregon was not coming back from a 34-point deficit. That is not happening, in particular against that Ohio State defense. So, survive the first quarter. That's number one. Let's talk about this Ohio State team, kind of what we've seen for a moment before we get into Texas. Obviously, the schematics have changed a little bit. I've talked about that at length. We saw the defense change a little bit, how they rush the quarterback, how they cover on the outside, taking away the first read on the outside. We've seen Nico Iamaleava and Dylan Gabriel have to hold the ball. The pass rush starts to show up. The only success Tennessee or Oregon had really was the ability of the quarterback to try to elude the rush and then find secondary and third in the progression wide receivers, and sometimes even on broken plays. That was really the offense for Tennessee and for Oregon. There wasn't really anything in the base offense there for either of those teams. Okay, so we've talked about the schematics from the Ohio State defense and the way that they're playing. We have talked about what this offense is doing since the Michigan loss. They have gone into speed and space. Players, not plays. Who's touching the football? Where are they getting it? And how aggressive are we being? And they are aggressive as they have been all year long. I do think it's worth pointing out that the pass game being dynamic early has opened up their ability to be more effective running the football. And when you see that, I'm like, okay, I went back and I was like, how much of that? Because on TV, it's almost all counter gap schemes, meaning they're pulling offensive linemen, they're pulling extra tight ends, and they're creating extra gaps, and they're down blocking. And so it's gap scheme running versus zone scheme running. And Ryan Day historically has been a zone running team. And I'm like, I haven't seen much zone. So I went back and I watched the film and I'm like, yep, they have basically abandoned the zone run game. They do not have the offensive line that can just sit there and push in a zone scheme, which means they're kind of sitting there and staying in position, creating a hole. They can't do that. So they've got to kind of fold the offensive line and bring pullers in. And that type of counter gap scheme has been really effective for them once they've opened up the defense via the aggressive passing game. That order is what's working. It's not run in order to throw, it's throw in order to run. And then you start getting the ball to these backs, and there's been some big runs that have popped because of that. So that's what we're seeing right now out of Ohio State schematically. However, that's not the best thing that's going on for Ohio State. The best thing that's going on for Ohio State is that psychologically, this team has totally changed. For the majority of the year, it looked like this team was going out there trying not to make mistakes, trying not to lose football games. That's the way they played against Michigan. That's the way they played against Nebraska, for that matter. And then you started to see like small glimpses of a team that could play free and easy and really have a psychological anger to go out there and prove themselves. You saw that a little bit early in the Indiana game, and then for the entirety against Tennessee, for the entirety against Oregon. This team psychologically has totally changed. This is a team playing with something to prove, with the freedom of something to chase rather than protect. Something happened in that Michigan game, and it wasn't just that the schematics of the offense was broken. It was like the psyche of the old Buckeyes was broken, and now the psychological freedom and anger of this Buckeyes team has been unleashed on everybody that they play. That's the way it looks. That's the way it looks. Texas, I've loved this Texas team. Got to cover them against Michigan. That day, I thought, oh, yeah, this team could definitely win the national championship. Sark has built them and built that roster into a roster that can absolutely compete at the top end. And I am a huge fan of Steve Sarkisian. This is the second straight year that they're in the national semifinals. He has done a remarkable job at Texas. Really has. Because that program was essentially in the desert of college football for the better part of 10 years until he got there. They could not figure it out. They were wandering around in the wilderness, looking at themselves, talking to themselves about how much money they have in their program, and just no success of any note to speak of. And now, back-to-back years, this guy has come in. His first year didn't go like everyone planned. It got a lot better his second year, and now here he is, and he's sitting here, back-to-back semifinal appearances. He has done a great job, and they're only going to get better from this. He continues to recruit. He's got quarterbacks lined up now, as Ewers probably is not going to be the Texas quarterback in the future. He's got Arch Manning sitting there. He's got young quality players. He totally rebuilt their line of scrimmage to be from a weakness into a real strength, which we saw against Clemson play out, and even in some parts saw against Arizona State. So this Texas team, I'm a huge, huge fan of. Huge fan of. Now, what are the issues with the Texas team? Well, the issues pop up when an opponent can beat and win the line of scrimmage, beat their offensive line. We saw that against Georgia a couple of times, and then we saw that really against Arizona State. I didn't think Arizona State was going to be able to sit there and stop the run against Texas like they were able to do, and they did a really good job of it. Georgia obviously did that in both outings against Texas, one in Austin and then in the SEC championship game. Here's the problem for Texas. Ohio State's run defense is a top 5 run defense in the country. And I think they're better than Georgia's run defense. I think they're better than Arizona State's run defense. If you look at Texas and what they did against, I would call like regular or average defenses, even in the SEC, they ran the ball well against Kentucky, 250, 240 against A&M. But then you go out there and it's like 31 against Georgia in the SEC championship game. Clemson's defense, not particularly strong on the defensive line. Texas, 292 running the football. Arizona State, 53. Like, what are we doing with these peaks and valleys? Well, there's something in common. The front of Arizona State and Georgia is probably better than those other fronts. And so when they see somebody that actually has a bit of a spine and a backbone in their defensive front 6 and 7, they struggle running the football. Ohio State is the best defense they will have faced, period. In particular up front, and especially with the way that defense is playing, specifically on the defensive line. That defensive line is playing incredibly well. That's a problem because when their run game is taken away, the dynamic nature of their play selection changes. See, Sark, when he's got the full throat of the offense going, Now, like, he's got something. The motions pop up, the play action pops up, and it's really good. When he doesn't, Ewers just has to put a cape on his back, which he can at times. Again, the drive to score in the second half against Arizona State, Ewers was terrific. And then on the 4th and 13, like, step up and make a throw. That was brilliant stuff from Quinn Ewers on 4th and 13 from Arizona State. But, like, can you do that from a sustained nature? They struggled to do that against Georgia in either matchup. They struggled at times against Arizona State. And this is a defense that is the best defense that they will face. So Texas has got to establish some sort of run game. Because if they don't, now it just becomes a Ewers deal, and you're trying to throw against a secondary that's taking everything away from everybody. The first read is not there against Ohio State. They're taking that away. They're playing tighter to the line of scrimmage. They can take away the first read. Their safeties are really good and very smart. And so they can confuse quarterbacks. They can change coverages. They're rolling and disguising incredibly well. And that is not good. What does it do? What does it promote? It promotes the quarterback to hold the ball for an extra beat. If you can't get to number one, and then you're trying to decipher and diagnose what's going on in the back end, you hold the ball for an extra beat. And when you hold the ball for an extra beat against Ohio State, the rush shows up. This is why they're so difficult to face right now. This is why they're the supernova of college football. So even when you're as good as Texas, the problem comes in is if you can't run the football. If they make you one-dimensional, it's over. And I'm not inspired with a ton of confidence that the Texas offensive line is all of a sudden against Ohio State going to show up and do what they did against like A&M or do what they did against Clemson. All right, I would more lean towards this is probably going to be a Texas offense that looked like what they did against Georgia. Take from that what you will. I do think Ewers has been playing really well. I was down on him a little bit after the SEC championship game. I think he has played a lot better in the playoffs, and they're going to need a lot of that. He's going to have to be great, and here's why. Ohio State's offense is not going to get stopped. As good as Texas is on the defensive side, this is just not an offense that's going to get stopped. Tennessee is a very good defense, and like you saw what happened against Tennessee. They are learning. Chip Kelly and Ryan Day have married their two strengths. Chip in terms of running the football off of the passing game, and Ryan's ability to just be aggressive in the passing game. It has turned them into like this dynamic offense. And when they want it, man, it's beautiful. Watching the film of the two first halves against Tennessee and Oregon, it's just like, oh my gosh. I would not want to be a defensive coach watching that film and trying to put together a plan. You got to be disruptive, and you've got to hope that Will Howard plays like he did against Michigan and not against Tennessee and Oregon. That's the biggest difference to me. The one thing that's not getting enough credit for Ohio State offensively is the way that Will Howard has been playing the last two games. I tell you what, man, it is night and day difference from what he did against Michigan. Will Howard has been exceptional. He was really good against Oregon in that Rose Bowl. That film was his best film that he's ever put out, ever. Now, is it going to be more difficult? Probably, because Texas's secondary is better than Tennessee's secondary, and it is better than Oregon's secondary. So it will be a little bit more difficult, but man, when you've got the confidence to play like Will Howard is playing, it really should continue. His play has been the key to Ohio State. And if he continues to play well, they will win the game. And maybe by a large margin. I just don't see, even though this game is in Dallas, I don't see this Ohio State team taking their foot off the gas. And if we're being really honest, the back half of the year, Texas has not quite looked like their full self. And it's going to take their full self. They're going to have to win the first quarter to keep the crowd engaged in Dallas and not allow the Buckeyes to just run off and hide. They have to run the football. There's a lot of things. The dominoes that have to fall over for Texas are, to me, just too many. Whereas Ohio State, they've got a lot of paths to victory here. Steve Sarkisian is right. Ohio State is playing the best football of anybody in the country. They've got a great roster, and if they play like that at all, they should win this game. I like Ohio State in this game, 34-21. Ohio State is favored by 5.5. I am going with the Buckeyes. They're covering the 5.5. 34-21. Ohio State wins it and I am predicting a Notre Dame, Ohio State national championship game.
Thank you for watching the Joel Klatt Show YouTube channel. And if you liked this clip, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel, and you can stay up to date on all of my college football coverage.